International rally. Stop racism and police violence. The working class and the oppressed should not pay for the coronavirus crisis. We support the struggles of the youth, Black and brown people, and the working class who are fighting and suffering the worst consequences of the pandemic.
Meeting international, stop au racisme et aux violences policières. Nous soutenons la lutte de la jeunesse, de la classe ouvrière et de tous les opprimés, car ce sont ceux qui combattent et vivent les pires conséquences de la crise sanitaire.
Ato internacional simultâneo. Basta de racismo e violência policial. Que a classe trabalhadora e os oprimidos não paguemos a crise do coronavírus. Apoiamos as lutas da juventude, da classe trabalhadora e de todos os oprimidos, que estamos combatendo e sofrendo as piores consequências do coronavírus.
Zeitgleiche internationale Veranstaltung. Schluss mit Rassismus und Polizeigewalt. Die ArbeiterInnenklasse und die Unterdrückten sollen nicht die Krise des Coronavirus zahlen. Wir unterstützen die Kämpfe der Jugend, der ArbeiterInnenklasse und aller Unterdrückten, die die schlimmsten Folgen des Coronavirus erleiden und gegen sie kämpfen.
Atto internazionale in diretta. Basta con il razzismo e la violenza della polizia. Basta far pagare la classe lavoratrice e gli oppressi per la crisi del coronavirus. Sosteniamo le lotte dei giovani, della classe operaia e di tutti gli oppressi che combattono e subiscono le peggiori conseguenze del coronavirus.
Acto internacional simultáneo. Basta de racismo y violencia policial. Que la clase trabajadora y los oprimidos no paguemos la crisis del coronavirus. Apoyamos las luchas de la juventud, la clase trabajadora y de todos los oprimidos que estamos combatiendo y sufriendo las peores consecuencias del coronavirus.
Buenos días, bienvenidas.
Good morning and welcome to all. Nicolás?
Good morning, Miriam. And also, I'd like to say good afternoon and good evening to some of our viewers who are in different time zones.
From the studios of La Izquierda Diario in Argentina, we'd like to welcome you all to this international rally.
This rally is being streamed simultaneously in different countries. It is also being translated into English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and German. And you can follow it from the different pages of our publication via YouTube and Facebook in the different languages that we're translating into live.
Great, Nicolás. We want to give a warm welcome to those of you who are joining this international rally and are watching us from the United States, Mexico, Costa Rica, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Uruguay, and Argentina, and in Europe from France, the United Kingdom, the Spanish state, Germany, Italy, and several other countries, Nico.
And the list goes on. Some will be watching us at a later time, because it's already very late now for our comrades in South Korea and other parts of Asia.
This rally is in support of the worldwide movement against racism in all of its forms.
We will hear from people from the United States, where the rallying cry Black Lives Matter has reverberated through 2,500 cities and towns.
It's amazing.
And it has led to what is considered to be the biggest wave of protests in the country's history. Millions have taken to the streets in the very heart of capitalism in the United States.
We'll also hear from people in France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Brazil, countries that have been rocked by massive protests. Here in Argentina, we in the United Left Front, which includes the Workers' Party, the Socialist Left, the Workers' Socialist Movement, and our own party, the Socialist Workers' Party, have been taking part in protests as part of this movement that has swept the globe.
Since the time of the conquest by Europeans, our continent has experienced the genocide and subjugation of native peoples, as well as the enslavement of black people, forcibly brought here from Africa. And today, people all over the world are increasingly denouncing the inextricable link between racism, capitalist exploitation, and imperialist expansion.
Racism, which is promoted by the ruling classes, has been entrenched in our societies to this day. In our country, we fight against the discrimination of Senegalese, Bolivian, Peruvian, and Paraguayan migrants, as well as many others, and against the reactionary tradition of using the slur cabecitas negras, or the pejoratively used term negros, against people who come from outside of Buenos Aires or on the members of native communities.
This rally also condemns violence perpetrated by police and state security forces. I Can't Breathe, the rallying cry that resounded throughout the globe in remembrance of George Floyd, who was crushed under the knee of Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin, has been echoed in several countries as a result of police violence.
In France, there was Adama Traoré. The same words were cried out by Walter Nadal before he was killed by the police of Tucumán here in Argentina, a province that's governed by the Peronist party of President Alberto Fernández, and the police have been involved every day in numerous crimes, like the recent disappearance and murder of Luis Espinosa, which we in the Left Front have denounced.
Yes, that's what we call Gatillo Facile in reference to police shootings. Continues to claim lives in Greater Buenos Aires and in other cities throughout the country. This is no coincidence. The national and provincial governments, whether from the ruling party or the right-wing opposition, have been responsible for increasing the power of security forces. That's why we also demand that Fasuda Castro, who was presumably abducted by the Buenos Aires police force, be brought back alive.
COVID-19 affects the entire planet, and in Argentina, it has mainly affected the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, from where we're streaming. Here, the number of cases has continued to rise, and it's the poor, and the frontline workers of the health, transportation, manufacturing, and retail industries who've been most affected.
Yes, and the media doesn't really show the situation faced by workers. State aid has been severely insufficient. Meanwhile, the government has been renegotiating an illegal and illegitimate external foreign debt, which we have continuously denounced and making gestures of goodwill to creditors, like the recent pension cuts.
So we called this rally to say that the burden of this severe economic crisis that's unfolding, with the resulting hunger and poverty, layoffs, wage cuts, and greater job insecurity, has to be borne by banks and big corporations, by capitalists, not by working people. We have to confront and break down the foreign debt mechanisms that have kept us under the yoke of imperialism and financial capital.
Por último, queremos reafirmar desde este acto que rechazamos la nueva ofensiva de
Lastly, we want to condemn the new offensive launched by Trump and the State of Israel against the Palestine people, with their plan to annex the West Bank.
All right, let's begin the rally. From France, we'll hear from Anas Kazib, a railway workers leader in Paris and a member of the revolutionary communist tendency in the new anti-capitalist party. He is also a columnist for the publication Permanent Revolution. Now let's go to him.
All right.
Chers camarades, bonjour à toutes et à tous, je m'appelle Anas, je suis
Hello, my name is Anas. I'm a railway worker in Paris from the immigrant and working class neighborhoods in France. My family comes from Morocco. My soldier grandfather was cannon fodder for French imperialism in the war. My father was also a railway worker, the ones called Chibanis, foreigners treated as second-class workers with fewer rights and worse working conditions and wages than the French railway workers. I grew up in the Paris suburbs. I've known racism and police violence since I was a child. Like many other workers, I was hit by COVID-19, which killed one of my relatives. For me, the surprising uprising against racism and violence, police violence in the United States against the backdrop of a global crisis has been a breath of fresh air. More than that, it has changed the mindset of millions of workers and young people in the United States and around the world. In France, this year has already been marked by an intense struggle against pension reform, driven for 2 months by transit workers. We've seen a return to forms of self-organization we hadn't seen for years. Then in France and beyond, we've undergone this international health crisis with an explosion of deaths in working-class neighborhoods. It has also revealed even more social and racial inequalities and reinforced class antagonisms between a quarantined bourgeoisie and a large part of the working class with precarious youth in the front lines. The central role of the proletariat has never been so visible. The bourgeoisie has been unable to make the heroes of the working class invisible, the cleaners, the cashiers, the delivery workers, and especially the health and public service workers. As quarantine began, we saw sectors that had not been part of the last class struggle eruptions demanding a halt to non-essential production. The economic crisis is intensifying in France. More than 500,000 more unemployed during the first quarter, and a succession of massive layoff plans announced by large companies. But the first real explosions have not come from the organized labor movement. They came from the United States following the murder of George Floyd, which aroused intense anger worldwide. In France, black and other minority youth from working-class neighborhoods have joined with young people from the big cities and are revolting against police violence and state racism. For weeks, the French government and mainstream media have told us that what's happening in the United States has nothing to do with France. Don't compare them with us, the nation of human rights, they say. They deliberately forget France's past. Massacres in its former colonies from Santo Domingo to Algeria that taught the French repression it could export to other countries, particularly in Latin America, and how to use these in its own working class neighborhoods. No wonder the slogan, Black Lives Matter, has found such an echo in the fight for justice and truth for Adama Traoré. Led by Adama's sister, Assa, the committee has become a sort of ambassador of anti-racism in France and elsewhere, and was even given a BET award recently. The committee has brought out tens of thousands to denounce police violence and state racism, and has drawn the links between Adama and George Floyd, who was choked to death by the police. We haven't seen anti-racist action like this for 40 years. For the first time, a group completely independent of the regime and of the state has managed to organize so many people, thanks to new alliances built over the last 4 years. For example, the next march to commemorate Adama will be held with youth organizations that have been fighting climate change. The 2019 march included the Yellow Vests. Our group has developed strong, trusting links with the Adama Committee over 4 years, notably with a joint call in 2018 for the working class neighborhoods to join the Yellow Vests movement for a demonstration that began at Saint-Lazare Station. For now, even if the slogans around dissolving the police have not yet been settled, we can see one result from the crackdowns in France against the Yellow Vests and the public transport workers. Many of them are racial minorities. Many are from working class slums. This has moved the needle to the left in France more clearly. And the questions being asked today are about institutionalized racism and not, like as in the past, about individual violence or racism. The crisis here is intensifying. The police and the Macron government face growing mistrust from below. The last municipal elections confirmed this, a rare defeat for a party in power, which testifies to how much the people detest Macron's government and how much difficulty it will face in the next class struggle clashes. But this cannot be allowed to benefit the reactionaries like Le Pen and her Rassemblement National party. Meanwhile, the old institutional left parties like the Greens and the Socialist Party, they try to build on their good showing in the municipal vote. But their alternative will lead only to new disappointments for workers. Philippe Poutou, one of the main worker spokespersons for the new anti-capitalist party, the NPA, was just elected to the Bordeaux Municipal Council. We, in Révolution Permanente, have been fighting to make the NPA a tool for building a genuine revolutionary combat party in France, a party that integrates various traditions of the far left as well as part of the vanguard that has emerged in the class struggle since 2016. Revolutionaries today must raise the urgency of wresting power from the hands of the bourgeoisie for a social transformation, to put an end to capitalism, to racism, and patriarchy. This requires fighting the capitalist policies that pit proletarians of different countries against each other, making immigrants or the workers in the country next door the scapegoat for the misery that capitalism itself imposes. We also need to combat the divisive bureaucratic trade union leaderships that seek to isolate workers in corporatism and purely economic fights. We must struggle for the emancipation of all workers and all humanity against racism, oppression, and exploitation. That's why we fight for the labor movement, beginning with our own unions, to take up the struggle against systemic racism and police violence. That's the only way to build alliances among youth, precarious workers, and the organized, so we can wrest power from the hands of the capitalists and lay the foundations for a new society without exploitation and without oppression. With unity of our class in every country and internationally, that is how we must fight. The borders the bourgeoisie imposes are not the borders of class struggle. This is the example of the murder of George Floyd. It is the example of the Yellow Vests movement in France, which helped open the way to new struggles in Chile, Ecuador, Lebanon, Algeria. This international international rally echoes this reality of an increasingly international class struggle. It poses the need to build an international revolutionary organization with a program to defend the survival of our class and answer the question Trotsky posed long ago: who will be the master of the house? To wrest power from the handful of parasites who, when they're not exploiting proletarians, let us die in pandemics, wars, and climate disasters they've caused to serve their own interests. The next period will be marked by a major economic crisis, combined with an ever-present health crisis, and our recent class struggle experiences will still be fresh in our collective memory. We have no doubt about the intensity of the class struggle in France and its intensity internationally in the coming period. We must prepare ourselves strategically and politically, not just to fight, but above all to win victories that prepare the overthrow of the bourgeoisie worldwide. I invite you, all of you, to join us in this exciting and indispensable task so we can survive. And on behalf of Révolution Permanente, I extend revolutionary greetings to each and every one of you.
Muchísimas gracias, Anas. Muy bueno lo que escuchamos.
Okay, thank you very much, Anas.
Francia. Y ahora
It was great to hear about our comrades in France.
Saludo desde Londres de nuestra corresponsal en el Reino Unido, así que
Now,
vamos a
Miriam,
Alejandra Ríos.
We'll hear from Alejandra Rio in London, who is our Left Voice correspondent in the UK. Let's go to her now.
Hello, comrades. My name is Alejandra. I am a university teacher and activist, and I bring greetings to this international rally. We are living in an exceptional period in which the police murder of George Floyd has ignited worldwide protest against racism and seems to be leading to a cultural shift led by the younger generations. Hundreds of thousands of people marched in cities across the United Kingdom under the banner of Black Lives Matter, calling for an end to police racism and brutality, but also locating the root of contemporary racism in colonialism and imperialism, in particular that of the British Empire. The turning point here was in the city of Bristol on June the 7th, when protesters pulled down the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston. The iconic scenes of protesters throwing the statue into the very same dock from which the slave ships had set sail gave a huge impetus to the struggle here. And after 7 weeks, demonstrators are still taking to the streets. Last Saturday, thousands of people marched through London, and another protest is taking place today. Black and minority ethnic workers are the most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic because they make up a large part of the workforce in the health and care professions. They are also overrepresented among transport and delivery workers and often do jobs which are very low pay and where social distancing is not practiced. For example, there have been spikes in the infection among the largely immigrant workforce in the meat processing plant in Wales and in clothing sweatshops in the city of Leicester, where most of the workers come originally from the Indian state of Gujarat. Structural racism such as this requires a political transformation of society to eradicate it, and it will take more than the removal of statues to achieve this. The thousands of young activists who rejected the xenophobic Brexit campaign and carried banners reading, "Refugees are welcome here," are now throwing their weight behind Black Lives Matter. Comrades, there is a long way to go, but a good start has been made. To get rid of racism means fighting to overthrow this rotten system of exploitation. Good luck to you all, whatever you are fighting.
Bueno, Nicolás, de Londres
Okay, Nicolas. Now we're going from London to Berlin, Germany. We'll hear from Yunus Ozgur, a Turkish migrant who's studying and working at the university and who is a member of the RIO group and the digital publication Class Against Class. Let's go to him now.
Genossinnen, mein Name ist Yunus Özgür und ich sende euch internationalistische
Comrades,
Grüße aus dem Herzen.
my name is Yunus Özgür. I send you internationalist greetings from the heart of German imperialism. It is a great honor to be part of this rally with revolutionary socialists from all over the world. The capitalists want to make the exploited and the oppressed pay for the pandemic. Women and immigrants especially are bearing the cost of the crisis. We are the ones who are the first to be fired, and we are the ones doing essential jobs with poor hygienic conditions. We are paying for the capitalist profits with our health and our lives. The example of Tönnies, the biggest meatpacking plant in Europe, owned by the racist billionaire Clemens Tönnies, is particularly crass. In his plant, more than 1,500 workers have been infected with the coronavirus. Most of them are immigrant workers from Romania and Bulgaria. Tönnies forced them to keep working even though they were sick. The government and the bourgeois media spread racist propaganda against the workers, accusing them of having imported the virus. The capitalists use racist and sexist divisions to maximize their profits. The trade union bureaucracy acts as an accomplice in this. The bureaucrats refuse to organize precarious sectors. They refuse to drop a plan of struggle with the heavy battalions of our class in order to make the capitalists pay for the crisis. In Germany, as well, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets to proclaim Black Lives Matter and demonstrate against racism and police violence. In recent months, we have seen racist attacks like the one in Hanau. There have been endless scandals involving right-wing networks in the police, the Secret Service, and the military. The trade unions should mobilize against racism, but their leaders are defending the police. We say clearly, the police have no place in our organizations. The racist immigration policies of German imperialism and other imperialist states have led to countless deaths in the Mediterranean and on the European borders. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has made the situation of tens of thousands of people in refugee camps even worse. German imperialism, with Merkel at the head, wants to save the European Union as the guarantee for the profits and the hegemony of German imperialism through the subjugation of the countries of Southern and Eastern Europe. For us, neither the European Union of Capital nor the reactionary utopia of a return to the nation state can be the hope of the working class, the youth, immigrants, and women. Only an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and internationalist perspective of the working class, independent of all wings of the bourgeoisie, independent of all reformist bureaucracies, beyond all national borders, can provide a solution to the crisis. That's why we fight for the perspective that the greatest revolutionaries in history, such as Leon Trotsky, called for, building up revolutionary organizations at the national and international level, fighting for the united socialist states of Europe. For us, this is one more reason to fight for the reconstruction of the Fourth International. Long live international solidarity.
Bueno, Nicolás, de Europa
All right, Nicolas. Now we're going to go from Europe to Latin America, specifically Brazil.
That's right, Miriam. We're going to go to the South American giant, and we'll start with Leticia Parks. She's a teacher, a columnist for Izquierda Diario, a member of the Revolutionary Workers Movement, and of the black struggle group Quilombo Vermelho. She and Marcelo Pablito Santos co-wrote the book Black Revolution and Liberation on the History of Black Struggle in Brazil. Let's hear from Leticia.
Boa tarde, companheiras e companheiros. Os maiores protestos de massas na história dos
Good afternoon, comrades. The largest wave of protests in U.S. history against the imperious police violence have impacted Brazil, leading to demonstrations against the reactionary Bolsonaro, Mourão, and the military. tensions are also rising because Brazil has among the highest death rates and infection rates due to the coronavirus, with an immense majority of black people affected. Thousands have taken to the streets in anti-fascist and anti-racist protests. We protested for João Pedro and so many other murdered by the police, chanting, "Black Lives Matter." I saw a video of a young black girl in the US screaming, "No justice, no peace." I thought of the situation of all of the black mothers in Brazil who lose their children because of police bullets, the coronavirus, and brutal capitalist exploitation and precarious work. Their right to live and decide their future is stolen, like little Miguel, 5 years old. His mother was a domestic worker who was taking her boss's dog for a walk. Her boss left Miguel alone in an elevator, and he ended up falling out the building. This is a symbol of the legacy of slavery in the lives of black women and the pain we live every day in Brazil. These capitalist tragedies take place in a Bolsonaro government, a president who, despite denying the dangers of the pandemic, tested positive for the virus. His government is the most fascist expression of the heirs of the 2016 institutional coup that ousted the Workers' Party, a coup articulated by the aristocratic and racist judicial branch, who helped organize the change in governments against the popular will of Brazil, as we saw with the arbitrary arrest of former President Lula. It is a racist and authoritarian judiciary who imprisons black people en masse, but who also was strengthened by the Workers' Party's own governments. As a result, today, the ultra-neoliberal Paulo Guedes is privatizing and making anti-worker reforms. There are Congress full of people who sell their votes for benefits, racist police who organize militias to murder young black people, criminalizing poverty with the excuse of a war on drugs. In this context, we are demanding an independent investigation into who killed Marielle Franco, a black lesbian councilwoman of the PSOL, a socialist party who was brutally murdered. And we cannot fail to say that this is the regime under the protection of the military who went unpunished for the crimes in the dictatorship and now have a former military leader in the vice presidency. That's why our struggle is not only to overthrow Bolsonaro and Mourão, but against this entire rotten regime, knowing that institutional mechanisms such as impeachment do not serve us. That is why we're fighting for a free and sovereign constituent assembly that not only changes the players, but changes the rules of the game, paving the way for a true popular sovereignty that can make decisions about the big problems for the working class. In this process, we defend the self-organization of workers to fight for a government of workers that breaks with the capitalist system, this miserable system that uses racism and patriarchy for profit and means violence and misery for women and black folks. Black struggle must be a struggle against capitalism. But also we need to say, the struggle in the United States has had an impact on youth and workers here, but the trade unions, even those led by the Workers' Party, particularly through the CUT, acted to separate the struggles and demanded that workers not protest due to the pandemic, maintaining a strong truce with the government. Yet at the same time, delivery workers from all over the country, Happy, iFood, Uber Eats from all over the country, who are majority black, went on strike. The Workers' Party passivity of just waiting until the next elections and refusing to take up worker struggles in unions is just one more expression of their politics, which has made room for the right wing and its government. It was the Workers' Party that began to implement austerity, allying itself with agribusiness and the evangelical church, as well as increasing subcontracting that went from 4 to 12 million during the Workers' Party presidencies, as well as massacring Haitian people with UN troops led by Brazil. Reformism in all its variants are incapable of ending the oppression of black people and women. All they do is manage capitalism. The broad coalitions that are beginning to draw themselves together, even sectors of the PSOL with coup plotters and businessmen, point towards a sure defeat. The unity we need is of the working class, which is majority black and majority women, side by side with exploited white workers, indigenous people, LGBT people, and immigrant people. In the earliest 20th century, Leon Trotsky said, to be a revolutionary, you need to see life through the eyes of women. In this moment of black rage and brutal racist and patriarchal violence, I call on all of you to see life with the powerful eyes of black women who all over the world have nothing to lose but our chains.
Bueno, ahora como nos adelantaba Nicolás...
Alright, now as Nico was saying, we're going to hear from Marcelo Pablito Santos, member of the Black Secretariat of the Union of Non-Faculty Workers of the University of Sao Paulo, a leader of the Revolutionary Workers Movement, and founder of the Quilombo Vermelho Association. Let's hear from him.
Let's go to him now.
Boa tarde, companheiras e companheiros.
Good afternoon to all. Over the past few weeks, I have been following the struggle of those in Brazil who work for the app delivery companies. One of them asked, "Can you imagine a job where you carry food on your back but have nothing to eat yourself?" This is the so-called modernization of labor advocated by President Bolsonaro through his reforms. But it is not modernization, it's called capitalism. Brazil's legacy of slavery means that the overwhelming majority of these are young, black women. And so, in their protests, we have also heard the cry, "Black Lives Matter." Understanding slavery gives us greater reason to fight against capitalism, this miserable system that uses racism to exploit us even more. With their religious and pseudo-scientific arguments, the bourgeoisie sought to justify the supposed inferiority of millions of people based on their physical characteristics. This was to create the conditions for enslaving more than 12 million Africans, which Marx called a decisive pillar of the primitive accumulation of capital, which was also one of the greatest atrocities in human history. Slavery ended in Brazil in 1888. We are taught that this was the work of an edict from a princess, precisely to hide the history of black people's struggle. But our history is the history of the Quilombos, of Zumba da Palmares, of the Malice Uprising, of the result of the Chibata, of the workers who defended the unity of blacks and whites in the trades unions. It is the story of people that cry out today, "We will rise again." Modern racism deepens with capitalist exploitation, even more so in Brazil, which has the largest black population of any country outside of Africa. Here, every government has kept black people, but also indigenous people, immigrants, and Northeasterners living under the worst conditions. Just as in the United States, Brazil has some affirmative action, but it has not changed the reality for the 31 million people who lack basic sanitation and the 13 million who live in the favelas, the slums, and who are mostly black. In the states it governs, even the Workers' Party itself, which approved the affirmative action racial quotas, has also unleashed attacks, such as through pension reform. That is why we fight for all rights for black people. But our goal is not that blacks should become part of the middle class or the bourgeoisie while most Brazilians live in misery. That is why our fight against racism is inseparable from the fight against capitalism. In this fight, we are not fooled, comrades. The police who put their knee on the necks of black people are not our allies. Currents on the left here in Brazil, such as the PSOL and the PSTU, make a huge mistake when they contend that the police are part of the working class and should be in our unions. Every day, these same police murder young people in the favelas. These same police organize the militias that are part of Bolsonaro's base, just like the striking workers in the United States. We in Brazil must demand the expulsion of the police from our unions. As C.L.R. James wrote, "The only place where Negroes did not revolt is in the pages of capitalist historians." It is time for us to reclaim the history of the international revolutionary movement, going back to the time of the First International, when Karl Marx supported the fight against slavery in the U.S. Civil War, to the fight against racism, and to the fight to defend the anti-colonial struggles in China, India, and elsewhere. We need to reclaim the battles of the Third International before Stalinist degradation, when it defended with all its might the cause of equal pay for blacks and whites. And we must reclaim the battles of the Fourth International, when Trotsky declared that conscious black workers were called by history to become the vanguard of the working class. These battles are more current than ever. Against imperialism and its limitless destruction, we must unite our class with all the peoples of the world, unify the working class without borders, and fight to put powerful revolutionary parties on the road to rebuilding the Fourth International.
Bueno, Miriam, ya escuchamos a nuestros compañeros y compañeras de...
All right, Miriam, we've heard from our comrades in Brazil. Now we've received messages of support from the forces that are part of the United Left Front, along with our party, the Socialist Workers' Party. We're going to hear from Celeste Fierro of the Workers' Socialist Movement, Juan Carlos Giordano of the Socialist Left.
Comrades, I would like to send you greetings from my comrades in the Socialist Workers' Movement in Argentina and from the International Socialist League. In this time of pandemic and a deepening capitalist crisis, the response of the governments around the world is to continue applying austerity and further exploiting the workers, the youth, and the people. But in response to these repressive, racist, and anti-worker policies, there has been a popular resistance and mobilizations in countries throughout the world. That is why, today, more than ever, it is necessary to support and coordinate each of these struggles by those of us in the socialist, anti-capitalist left who are intervening in this historic moment. Comrades, our greetings and good luck in this event.
In the name of Izquierda Socialista, which is part of the International Unity of Workers tendency that publishes the magazine International Correspondence, we send greetings to the internationalist rally organized by the Trotskyist Fraction, Izquierda Diario, and the PTS of Argentina. We stand together in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic and also the pandemic of hunger, misery, and poverty that all governments unload on the people with the aid of the union bureaucracies. We are also part of a worldwide rebellion that rejects these attacks, like the Antis rebellion against Donald Trump in the United States, and so many other manifestations of the struggle worldwide. We call for massive fightback so that the crisis is paid for by the capitalists and not the workers. For an emergency plan based on the non-payment of foreign debt and the taxation of the largest corporations, banks, and multinationals. For a worldwide movement of the anti-capitalist and socialist left to fight these objectives. Greetings to you in the name of Izquierda Socialista, part of the Workers and Left Front.
Bueno, Nicolás, y ahora nos dará un saludo.
All right, Nicolás. Now, from Araucanía, in the south of Chile, the land of the native Mapuche communities, we'll hear from Camila Delgado, a leader of the Revolutionary Workers' Party in that region, and of La Izquierda Diario in Chile. Let's go to her now.
All right.
Desde Temuco, el sur de Chile, les mando un gran saludo internacionalista a todas y todos.
From Temuco, in the south of Chile, I send a big internationalist greeting to each and every one of you. I live in the region of La Araucanía, the territory and the epicenter of the resistance of the Mapuche people. Here, police violence is systematic. There are militarized zones and murders of activists. We can never forget that both the right wing and the progressive governments are responsible for this. Police impunity is one of the reasons why we rebelled in October, during which time the Mapuche flag flew at every protest. In Temuco, we also tore down statues and symbols of colonizers, as is happening today in other countries. Here, it is very clear that the enemies of the national and regional self-determination of oppressed peoples are the logging monopolies, the large landowners, the capitalists, and their repressive forces. To end the oppression, we must defeat them once and for all. It is not an easy task, but we saw the strength of the working class, the youth, and all those who mobilized in the streets. Our power shook Piñera and his administration to their core. We also saw how the reformist parties and the union bureaucracy stood in the way of Piñera's government falling completely. They are the same ones that today have led us to an unprecedented health, social, and economic crisis. They are the same ones that have locked up over 2,000 political prisoners from the uprisings, as well as the Mapuche prisoners who today are on hunger strike. We demand their freedom now. We share the fight to forge an alliance between workers, Mapuche, and the youth, with our comrades in the PTS, who lie on the other side of the Andes Mountains in Argentina. The Zanon factory workers, who developed a deep relationship with the Mapuche community in the Neuquén province of Argentina, are a great inspiration to us. To begin to forge that alliance and defeat those who support the criminal government, it is necessary for us to build a revolutionary party of the working class, one that is made up of the new anti-capitalist and revolutionary left. We've begun to put forward and agitate for the need for a revolutionary party in the work we're doing with the hundreds of comrades with whom we've been organizing in groups such as the Emergency and Protection Committee in Antofagasta, the Health and Safety Committee in the Barros Luco Hospital, as well as the Popular Assembly in Temuco. As millions around the world continue their struggles against capitalism, our duty to continue to fight and to win. We send a strong internationalist message of solidarity in our shared struggle.
Bueno, Miriam, ahora seguimos en Latinoamérica, desde Chile.
All right, Miriam. Now, from another part of Latin America, in Bolivia, we'll hear from Carlos Conejo, who was one of the young members of the native Amahan community who rose up against the coup in El Alto last year. Carlos is a columnist for Izquierda Diario Bolivia and a member of the Revolutionary Workers League of the Fourth International. Let's go to him.
Desde Bolivia, enviamos un saludo al acto internacionalista y al movimiento.
From Bolivia, we send a greeting to the international rally against racism and police violence, as well as to the movement of millions of people mobilized for this cause. We send this message in the midst of the collapse of the health system in our country. Several hospitals have closed or are on the brink of closure due to the high infection rate of hospital staff. Countless people are dying at home and even in the streets. Bodies are left unattended in their homes for up to 8 days, while the racist coup government of Janine Áñez continues to privatize the health sector. From the Revolutionary Workers League in Bolivia, we fight for the end of all repressive forces, and so that the budget addresses the needs of workers, especially the need for PPE, as we have already seen so many comrades die from the virus. We send this warm greeting to the Black Lives Matter protesters in the U.S. and to those who fight against police and state repression, since their fight is our fight. In Bolivia, the racist right-wing coup left many dead, wounded, or tortured. Fascist and religious groups collaborated with the coup government by targeting and attacking peasants and indigenous people, especially Polero women, exposing the racist brutality that is fundamental to the ruling class and their repressive apparatuses. In this sense, the uprisings against racism and police repression in the U.S. give us strength here to fight against the coup government. The same imperialist forces that assassinated George Floyd in the United States also promoted the coup d'etat in Bolivia, with the OAS and Donald Trump backing the right-wing sectors in Bolivia, specifically concentrated among the banking, financial, and agro industries. We are proud of our indigeneity and indigenous heritage. However, despite 14 years under Evo Morales' supposedly progressive government, we are still the most precarious sector of workers, holding low-wage jobs in cleaning, construction, or gig work. They believed that by creating an alliance with the capitalists, racial violence could be eradicated and socialism could be achieved. That strategy proved drastically wrong this past November when the coup government was established. As socialists, we know that racism does not end by making agreements with racists, but instead when we fight on the streets, as we have seen millions doing in the U.S. and around the world. We are inspired by all of the struggles led by workers that are taking place globally, demanding the freedom of the thousands of political prisoners who mobilized against racism in the U.S., Bolivia, and around the world, and who are developing forms of independent self-organization in order to confront the governments that are forcing us to carry the burden of the crisis on our back. Because workers' lives matter, we need to build a strong international organization of workers to confront the capitalists and their states who feed all forms of exploitation and oppression. Long live the Fourth International.
Great, Nicolás. Now, in the final and central part of this rally, we'll hear from our comrades in the United States.
Let's begin with New York. We'll hear from Mike Papas, a physician and founder of the Mount Sinai Hospital Health Workers Committee and a member of Left Voice.
Hi comrades, my name is Mike Pappas. I'm a physician in New York City and member of Left Voice. When I went to med school, I wanted to be a doctor so I could help people. But what do I do when I'm caring for a patient during a pandemic who's in respiratory failure, about to be placed on a ventilator, and he asked me who's gonna pay for it? Another patient I saw, 45 years old, made an appointment specifically to talk about COVID-19. He was extremely concerned for his elderly father, who he lived with and cared for, had chronic diseases that put him at risk for dying from COVID if he got it. He told me, "I'm scared I'll bring COVID home and kill my dad." He had to go to work in order to pay rent, pay for food, and utilities. The ultimatum of US capitalism: work and risk your health, or don't work and risk your survival. This is the case for millions of essential workers in the US who work in warehouses, delivery, transit, meat plants, and on the fields picking fruits. These workers are disproportionately Black, Brown, Asian, and undocumented. Black and brown communities most affected by racist police brutality and mass incarceration, by unemployment and housing precarity, and by pollution and toxic environments are also twice as likely to die from coronavirus. COVID-19 only magnifies the systemic racism that has always been the bedrock of US capitalism, forged from chattel slavery. Over the last several weeks, we've seen an uprising against the pandemic within a pandemic. The systemic racism and the police who execute 1,000 people per year with impunity. The ruling class requires racist police repression. Police protect property, not people, and the ruling class needs them now more than ever to maintain the current economic order. The mass mobilizations after the murder of George Floyd transformed the political scene. We healthcare workers unequivocally condemn police terror and join the protests. We've only seen police brutality increase as people rise up. I was illegally arrested by the NYPD while volunteering as a medic. Trump's disastrous handling of the pandemic was followed by the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression. The government broke all records with their bailout for big business while setting aside a meager portion to mitigate the impact on unemployment and workers' income. Almost 20 million people remain jobless even after reopening, which means most of them are left without health care as well. As healthcare workers literally sacrifice our lives on the front lines caring for COVID-19 patients, oftentimes lacking appropriate equipment, Republicans are prioritizing the economy and sending workers to die at their workplaces. This shows that the government only cares about Wall Street, desperately seeking a rebound on the economy, but it is on us, workers, who are paying the cost with our own lives. Frankly, the Democrats are no better. While Trump oozes with racist rhetoric every time he opens his mouth, Democratic governors and mayors were giving free rein to their police departments to repress protests. The brutal repression that occurred at my arrest occurred with the support of a Democratic mayor and a Democratic governor. Democrats in Congress or those running for office pay lip service to protesters, but they're just as responsible for maintaining a system of oppression and inequalities that perpetuates poverty and racism and police brutality. Trump has ramped up attacks against immigrants. He has bragged about the construction of the wall at the border with Mexico and kept children in cages, all while blocking the new arrival of refugees from Central America. Through an agreement with Mexican President Lopez Obrador, Biden and Trump blame China for economic crisis and for the pandemic, or they blame Mexican workers for the low wages. The Chinese government is no friend of labor with their repression on Hong Kong protesters. But what Democrats and Republicans are hiding is that it is American capitalists with the government on their side who keep wages at poverty levels and precarious working conditions. From the pages of Left Voice, La Izquierda Diario International Network, and with the political organizations behind the newspapers, we've put forward a radically different program to face the pandemic. We've pushed for massive tests everywhere, appropriate PPE, paid leave, a freeze on layoffs, nationalization of all healthcare under workers and workers' committees at workplaces to guarantee our own safety. The working class is bearing the brunt of the pandemic and is the target of racist police repression. We are the majority of the population, and we are the ones making everything turn. In the past 2 months, there has been a dramatic increase in strikes and workplace actions. Dock workers shut down 29 ports along the West Coast in solidarity with the movement against police terror. Workers are walking out not only in the fight for safe working conditions, but also protesting racist police brutality. The power to disrupt the economy is in our hands. We are witnessing a shift to the left in political situation, with many unions mobilizing for Black lives and voting to kick police out of the AFL-CIO. The near future is ripe with crisis and contradictions. We are literally to see more social unrest and class struggles. This will open for us the opportunity to take back our organizations, the unions, which have been hijacked by the rotten bureaucracy who ties our fates to the boss's parties and plays by their rules. It is the militant rank and file who can accomplish the task of democratizing and revitalizing our unions by shoving aside the conservative bureaucrats. This is a difficult but strategic task for socialists today. We need to take back our unions and turn them into organizations of militant class struggle. A central piece in this battle is to kick cops out of our unions. We need to take the lead of rank and file members of MLK County Labor Council, Writers Guild East, and PSC CUNY, who pushed for these resolutions in their unions. Police are our class enemy. They have no place in the House of Labor. But we need to go beyond that. We need a party of workers and people of color independent of the Democrats and Republicans. A party that fights for socialism. I can only imagine the enormous difference it would make if in the current political climate there were a truly revolutionary party on the streets with the working class. With Left Voice, we're trying to help prepare fertile ground for such a party to grow in the US. One that can lead the fight for a society in which resources are distributed by need and not profit, and in which prisons, the police, can be done away with permanently.
Bueno, gracias Mike y Nicolás. Seguimos en Estados Unidos.
Thank you, Mike. And Nicolás, let's hear from some more of the United States. We'll hear briefly now from Manny, a Black activist and member of the People's Assembly, formed in the occupied area in front of New York City Hall to condemn the multi-million-dollar budget allocated to the police force.
Hi everyone, I'm Manny. I'm speaking from New York City at the City Hall occupation that we have here that we've dubbed Abolition Park. We're here, and for over a week now, we've set up a space for the mass amount of protesters and everyday people that are fighting against white supremacy, racism, and police brutality. We have provided a space here not only for us, but for the people who are not as lucky as us. And through that, we're going to build a coalition of everyday people and protesters and coordinators who are going to fight back against police. We're here not only to defund the police, but we're also here to abolish the police. We want to abolish them and the capitalist system that they uphold. We're here for oppressed lives around the world and for Black lives here, right here in America.
Bueno, Miriam, vamos a seguir con la juventud.
Okay, Miriam, let's hear some more from the youth of the United States. Now, also from New York, we'll hear from Mariam Alanis, a graduate student and member of Left Voice.
My name is Mariam Alanis. I'm 24 years old, queer, and the daughter of Iranian immigrants, and I'm excited to be speaking at this international rally with socialists from other countries fighting against racist police violence and the capitalist system. Right now in the US, we are in the midst of what is being described as the largest movement in the history of this country. Millions of people have taken to the streets over the past few weeks. These uprisings are being led by Black working class youth who are fed up with racism and police violence. And this movement is full of young people, from the youth who organized the climate march to the youth who protested against ICE detention centers. We are young folks who know that the LGBTQ movement, which was launched by Stonewall, was a riot. And we want to fight for a society where Black lives matter. And it's not just young folks in the US. Last year, we watched Chilean youth fight the police in the streets, as well as young people in Iran and Lebanon. In these countries, people are fighting not only their government and their own police, but the weight of US imperialism. In countries like Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran, where my family lives, people are struggling every day under oppressive and inhumane US sanctions. Amidst Israel's plan to annex the West Bank and Palestine, Israeli police recently murdered 27-year-old Ahmad Erekat at a West Bank checkpoint. When we fight against the police here, we fight against the carnage of imperialism everywhere. Young people are on the front lines of this struggle because of our own life experiences. In my short life, I've already lived through 2 economic crises. Right as the pandemic hit, I was laid off like millions of workers across the country. Over 20% of people ages 16 to 24 in the US are currently unemployed. Among Black youth, the unemployment rate is close to 30%. Among the Latino community, especially Mexicans and Central Americans, the unemployment rate is currently 37%. The shackles of student debt that we will never pay off undermine our hopes for a future. More and more of us understand that a climate crisis looms large, threatening our futures. It's no wonder that we are turning to socialism and taking to the streets. In the US, the image of George Floyd begging for his life under the weight of police brutality lit a spark for millions of people. For almost 2 months now, we've been confronting the state night after night. As the ruling class throws us pitiful crumbs, it is clear that we can't reform the system that's killing Black people, cutting services for oppressed communities, and jobs for the working class. The whole system of policing needs to go. We need to abolish policing altogether, but this requires more than budget cuts. It requires an end to a capitalist system that needs police to protect the enormous wealth of people like Jeff Bezos. These past 2 weeks, an occupation outside City Hall in New York City brought together many of the young people who resisted the curfew and faced off against tear gas and rubber bullets in a city run by Democrats. In Seattle, young people not only took over a park, but took over a police precinct, organizing the Capitol Hill or Occupied Protest, or CHOP for short, which was an area democratically run by protesters without cops. But social movements alone will never be enough. Past uprisings such as the first spate of Black Lives Matter protests, Occupy Wall Street, and the anti-globalism protests of the 90s inspired us, but also taught us that we need to go further to meaningfully change this horrible system of global capitalism. If we want to avoid the co-optation, fatigue, or demoralization that so many other movements have experienced, we have to imagine the necessary steps for the movement to radicalize, spread, and embrace a revolutionary perspective beyond our autonomous zones. To this end, we must understand that in order to win the fight against capitalism and imperialism, we must join our movement with the working class. They alone have the power to grind the gears of capitalist production to a halt. But we can't fight capitalism from within a capitalist party. The Democratic Party, once again, is trying to play the role of a graveyard for our struggles. The young people mobilized in the streets today, the young people who consider themselves socialists, have to challenge the cynical politics of lesser evilism that calls for a vote for so-called progressive Democrats. The future is ours, and we want more. We want our own socialist candidates, truly representative of the workers and the multiracial youth that are taking to the streets. We want public and universal health care. We want public and free universities. We want housing for all. We want to abolish ICE. We want to abolish the police, and we want to open the borders. We want the total emancipation of Black and brown people and of women. We want the rights for undocumented folks. We want liberation for queer folks, and we want to save the planet from climate catastrophe. It is necessary to confront the wealth of the super wealthy who who are among the richest on the planet thanks to financial capital and the exploitation of the working class worldwide. That is why we need an independent, revolutionary working class party that fights for socialism. A party that is able to coordinate these efforts nationally and internationally against the cops, the military, against borders, sanctions, and even bombs. The Democratic Party, under the progressive wing of Bernie Sanders, will never be that party. So, all the young people who are turning to socialism, who are angry at the political establishment and believe that we should defund and abolish the police, all those that are organized in groups like the DSA must break with the Democratic Party now, and we must work together with all of our resources to build an independent socialist party. It is undeniable that we are living in a historic moment. Our generation doesn't trust cops, capitalist parties, or the status quo anymore. More and more, people are rejecting the idea that revolution is impossible. And right now, the Black working class youth are leading the way. Radical young Americans and students like myself have been at the forefront of putting up inspiring fights in the past. From the lunch counter sit-ins during the Civil Rights Movement to the student uprisings against the Vietnam War. But an uprising is not enough. We have to fight to crush the capitalist system once and for all. Under this new political awakening, we have the historic task ahead of us to unite this movement with the revolutionary working class. We are proudly the legacy of Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, and Luxemburg. We want to inject new energy into the labor movement. A socialist future is on the horizon, and we are here to fight for it.
Y para cerrar este acto,
All right, and to close this event, we're going to the west coast of the United States, to Los Angeles, where we'll hear from Julia Wallace, an anti-racism activist from the Black community and a member of Left Voice who has been a Trotskyist militant for the past 20 years.
Let's hear from Julia.
My name is Julia Wallace. I have been an anti-racist activist. I'm a founding member of Left Voice, and I've been a Trotskyist for 2 decades. I grew up in a working class Black neighborhood in Los Angeles, and my mother was a teacher at the Freedom Schools with the Southern California chapter of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Like so many Black people in the US, I have experienced and faced racism and violence at the hands of police. And today I am so inspired to see so many Black youth in the streets, along with millions of others, against police brutality and systemic racism. For the past 100 days, there have been demonstrations in 2,500 cities and towns across the world and the US. They've been led by Black and brown precarious youth. They've declared slogans like Black Lives Matter and abolish the police. They've been unrelenting in challenging the racism of this system and the corrupt police. The police have been a racist, corrupt, murderous, occupying force in Black communities. They have tortured, beaten, and killed Black and brown youth. They have humiliated and attacked trans youth. They've attacked disabled and elderly and homeless youth as well, including Derek Chauvin, the racist, sadistic cop who grinned as he murdered George Floyd, suffocating him to death in broad daylight for all the world to see. He thought he could get away with it. Instead, there's been a fury that's been unleashed. People have exploded, not only against the police in Minneapolis, but against the police of the world. Relics of slavery have been torn down in front of crowds of cheering youth. Police precincts have been razed, cop cars burned, stores like Target burned with massive support. City blocks and streets have been taken over and occupied. The murder of George Floyd unleashed a fury that hasn't been seen in decades against not only the murder of George Floyd, but against the pandemic and the economic crisis, all of which capitalism cannot resolve. The police cannot be reformed. US capitalism is racist to its core because it was founded on slavery, trafficking and kidnapping African labor for the benefits of the cotton industry to benefit the largest industry, the English industry. As Marx said, without slavery, there would be no cotton. Without cotton, there would be no modern industry. From the country's beginnings, the American capitalists and slave owners took every measure they could to keep the working classes divided and from rising up together. From the creation of slave patrols to police, to institutionalizing racism in their laws. They brutalized and exploited Black enslaved workers. Black people toiled in the fields, making US capitalists and slave owners rich. When slavery was abolished, they created Jim Crow. When Jim Crow was undermined by the civil rights movement, they created other laws to marginalize and attack Black people. This meant that the police served a purpose to attack Black people and maintain private property. White workers were paid for their compliance and privileges and intimidated by those same enforcers if they resisted. The goal of the capitalists was to prevent the poor and exploited and other oppressed people from coming together. Even today, Black people are paid less than whites for the same work, have higher rates of unemployment and homelessness, and are disproportionately killed by police. Racism permeates every aspect of society. Still, there are numerous examples of Black and white and other ethnicities fighting together against racism. The multi-ethnic struggle happening today is the worst nightmare for the American bourgeoisie. Both the Democrats and Republicans aim to quell this movement, but have different strategies. The Republicans under Trump have openly embraced white supremacists with the most violent and bigoted rhetoric. Trump called on the National Guard and military to put down the protests. He threatened, if they start looting, we'll start shooting, quoting a racist police chief from the civil rights era. Instead, the protesters got even more bold, forcing Trump to retreat into his bunker like the coward that he is. His rhetoric still emboldens white supremacists who have continued to attack and murder protesters along with the police. The strategy of the Democrats, on the other hand, has been pandering and co-optation, trying to disguise their years of attacks on the Black community. The Democrats have helped facilitate massive rates of incarceration, gentrification, and have protected murderous police, like Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. In both the Clinton and Obama administrations, Black people have suffered unprecedented evictions and foreclosures and attacks. Now, Democrats kneeling on the floor of Congress, draped in kente cloth, claim to support the movement. Meanwhile, as night falls, they drop tear gas on the protesters and beat them in the streets. Presidential hopeful and former Vice President Joe Biden said to the Black Lives Matter movement, the police should shoot Black people in the leg rather than the heart. What a racist clown. This is who the union bureaucracy, NGOs, and nonprofits are gearing up to campaign for? We will not be bought off by weak concessions to endorse our own oppression. Neither capitalist party can resolve the issues of the crisis, systemic racism, or police brutality. To end systemic racism and police brutality, we need a strategy for liberation. We need a strategy that fights both capitalism and the police who defend them. That's how we get free, by organizing ourselves as the working class. As the coronavirus pandemic has shown us, the bosses are not essential. The working class is essential. Workers can halt the wheels of capitalism, but more than that, workers can organize all of production and reproduction in the services of all of our lives instead of their profits. Workers, both unionized and precarious, can organize and fight back against racism at our workplaces and communities and against the exploitation of the bosses. We also need to fight the union bureaucracy, who is refusing to mobilize our ranks to protect our jobs and to defend us against the austerity being imposed by both the Democrat and Republican parties. We, the working class and oppressed, need a party independent of the capitalists and imperialists, with no cops, bosses, or bigots as members. We must organize ourselves politically in the streets and workplaces and build a party that represents our interests. Building a revolutionary party in the world's largest imperialist power is an enormous task, but it would be a historic challenge with historic consequences. This challenge is inseparable from building an international party of the working class, which for us is the Fourth International. That's how Trotsky and the American Trotskyists of the original Socialist Workers' Party at the end of the 1930s had envisioned. Our organization, the Trotskyist Fraction, our website network of La Izquierda Diario, published in 14 different countries, takes up this internationalist challenge. We agree with Leon Trotsky, who laid down the basic strategy of overthrowing capitalism and building socialism on a global scale. We invite all the youth in the streets, Black and brown activists fighting police brutality, socialists, and workers rising up against capitalism to rebuild with us the Fourth International. Racism is the enemy of the working class, and violent police are the key component to capitalist exploitation. We must destroy capitalism and abolish the police with international proletarian solidarity and militancy. We continue the struggle for the revolutionaries who came before us and build towards a socialist future. So let the capitalists tremble, because they should be scared, because we will stop at nothing less than a complete end to bigotry, police, racism, capitalism, and imperialism, for an international socialist revolution of the working class and oppressed. As Karl Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto, and Assata Shakur, a Black revolutionary, wrote in her pledge, we have nothing to lose but our chains, and we have a world to win.
Nos despedimos agradeciendo la participación de todos ustedes y anticipamos.
We want to thank you all for your participation, and we hope you'll join us again at the end of August for the international activities that we're preparing for the 80th anniversary of the murder of Leon Trotsky at the hands of a Stalinist agent. We're organizing this event to debate the relevance of his ideas in light of the serious capitalist crisis that we're experiencing.
All right, thank you very much. Nicolas and I want to thank you all for having taken part in this rally. And as Nico just said,
See you next time.